Good evening, everybody. My name is Ian Larkin. I am the CAL FIRE Unit Chief for the San Mateo-Santa Cruz unit. Welcome to the last of two CAL FIRE CZU Lightning Complex community meetings that are being held. Tonight's meeting will be presented to Supervisorial District 5, focusing on the San Lorenzo Valley and the communities of Felton, Ben Lomond, Brookdale, Boulder Creek, Zayene, and Scotts Valley. The first meeting of this two-part series was held last night for Supervisorial District 3, focusing on the Bonnie Doon, Davenport, and North Coast areas. If you are from a different part of the county, this information that's being provided at each of the meetings is exactly the same presentation. So if you were here last night, you're going to see the exact same presentation that you saw last night. First thing I would like to start out with is a moment of silence in recognition of Mr. Tad Jones, who tragically lost his life during the CZU Lightning Complex fire. Thank you for that moment of silence. I would like to apologize to you all for how long it's taken CAL FIRE to hold these community meetings. Normally, we would hold these types of community meetings in person and prior to the full control of the incident to allow our CAL FIRE incident management team to participate in this meeting. But due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the precautions that we have to take with that, we were unable to meet that goal. We'd come to a point that we could no longer hold off conducting these meetings due to these restrictions. So we found a new platform to deliver this meeting. This meeting will provide an incident summary and lessons learned. It is not meant to be an after-action review. Our presentation is approximately 50 minutes in length. And at the conclusion, we will have an answer and question period. We are asking everybody to please hold your questions until the end of the presentation. I know these have been challenging times for us all, and I know you all have lost a lot of you have lost your homes and emotions are high. I would like to say that we are empathetic to your losses, as we have also had several of our own firefighters who've suffered these same losses. I'm requesting that all of us be courteous to each other during the question and answer segment so that we can try to get to as many of the questions as possible. I do want to remind everybody that this is a live meeting broadcast on community TV. Now I'd like to introduce our panelists for tonight. CAL FIRE Deputy Chief Nate Armstrong will be co-presenting with me tonight. CAL FIRE Deputy Chief Jonathan Cox, who will be assisting us in the facilitation of the answer and question session. And then from the Sheriff's Office, we have Chief Deputy Chris Clark. And then from the Santa Cruz County Office of Emergency Services, we have Michael Beat. Supervisor McPherson is listening into this broadcast, but will not be participating as a panelist. I'd also like to take an opportunity to thank Community TV for providing us this venue to be able to deliver this meeting. So we're going to go ahead and start off here. I'd like to just start off by painting a picture of what occurred here. So at approximately 3 a.m. on August 16th, 2020, a lightning storm made landfall that generated approximately 12,000 lightning strikes across California. That series of lightning strikes caused more than 585 fires across the state of California. And of that, 24 of those fires became major incidents. 300 plus lightning strikes hit directly here in San Mateo and Santa Cruz counties. From those 300 lightning strikes, we had 27 confirmed fires that had been ignited in the unit from that storm that had passed through. And just to kind of paint a picture of our daily staffing here in the San Mateo-Santa Cruz unit, better known as CZU, our staffing consists of 13 fire engines that are staffed on a daily basis during our peak fire season, 2 bulldozers, we have 3 fire crews, and then we have 4 shift battalion chiefs that provide overhead support for approximately 455,000 state responsibility acres or state lands that we protect here in the 2 counties. Leading up to this, we had been experiencing drought conditions for several years, as we're all aware of. Recently, the weather leading up to the weeks prior to this, we had seen temperatures in excess of 100 degrees, and our relative humidities had been in the single digits and as low as 4% humidity leading up to the fires. And the week prior to the fire, we had no coastal influence that is kind of our helps with our humidity recoveries at night leading up to the fire event. So before I turn the presentation over to Deputy Chief Armstrong, I wanted to just take a moment to be very clear to everybody. Every decision that we make and every action that we take have three main priorities that we use in our decision-making process. Those are the protection of life, protection of property, and environment, and in that order. So I just want to emphasize to everybody, the last thing that any of us ever wanted to occur in an incident like this is to have somebody die or for people to lose their homes. So when we base our decisions, we base them on those three those principles and priorities: life, property, and the environment. So at this point, I'll turn the presentation over to Deputy Chief Armstrong.
Good evening, everybody. As Chief Larkin said, my name is Nate Armstrong. I'm the Deputy Chief for CAL FIRE here in the San Mateo-Santa Cruz unit, overseeing our state operations and overall operations within Santa Cruz County for us. So I want to take you guys through just some operational kind of components in the early days, the first couple of days of the fire, really before it grew into what everybody knew it to be. So this whole lightning siege really started for us kind of the day before, on August the 15th. What you're seeing on the screen right now is the San Mateo Santa Cruz unit lightning plan, and we won't go into massive detail on this. It's just to illustrate we do have a plan for events just such as this, and we call it an LCA, a lightning coordination area plan. And basically what it does is it breaks things down for us to go into a different mode from our day-to-day operations and really be able to track multiple strikes, get folks out to assess those strikes, and hopefully be able to staff any small fires and keep them small. So the day before, like I say, on August 15th, we knew that this lightning was coming. We didn't know to the extent that it would be, but just to reinforce with everybody, we had sent out this plan, made sure everybody was refreshed on it, knowing that we would likely be following it the next day. And we absolutely did. We followed the plan to a T. It was well implemented. It was well exercised. Unfortunately, we just didn't have the resources to fully staff all of the fires like we would have wished. So that's all I'll really go. I just want to touch on this lightning plan really quick. So early morning, Sunday, August 16th, by the time we got up, or about 0600 in the morning, or sorry, 6 a.m., we had 27 fires, active fires in the unit. We were receiving hundreds of 911 calls, and I'm sure some of the folks on this call tonight may have been, you may have seen a smoke plume and called 911. So typically what happens is as the sun comes up, more people are getting up, these smoke plumes we get to be more visible, and we get dozens, if not hundreds of calls per fire. So significant strain on our system. Early that morning, our duty chief for the unit instituted what we call a staffing pattern, and that was to hold all of our personnel on duty. That would be the beginning of what was well over a month before most folks had a single day off. So we held all our personnel on duty. We staffed every extra piece of equipment that we had, from reserve engines to county engines that we administer through contracts. We also called all of our volunteer companies that CAL FIRE administers in Santa Cruz and San Mateo counties, and just to have them staff their equipment as they were available, because we knew we were going to need the help. Obviously, our local cooperators throughout the county were also involved as we started to fight some of these fires. It got down to the extent where we had folks in pickup trucks with hand tools just to be able to get people out to find these fires and really assess what we had. The next slide, please, Chief. So what I want to illustrate a couple of things with this slide. So the photo that you're looking at is, with the exception of one that I should have added, but it's too late now, so I'll tell you about it. These are all the fires that most people that are on the call tonight probably never heard of. These are all the fires that we extinguished within about the first 24 hours. So most of the fires were small. We were able to catch them. We were able to contain them, put them out, or at least get them in those early stages. And a couple of notable fires on here. If you can see the 3-11 right there on the Chief's cursor, that was in the community of Zayante. That was a little better than 10 acres. It was in a very well-populated area. And our CAL FIRE resources, Zayante Fire Protection District, were on that fire for a couple of days, but that was extinguished or contained at least in the first day. The 3-10 was in the China Grade area. Again, that was in a semi-populated area. That was an almost immediate threat to structures, but that was also extinguished in the first day. One other fire that didn't make this map, it was the Waranella fire, and that is just south of that 3-22 on the north coast, north of Davenport. That was probably the most immediate threat, aside from that 3-11, to the communities of Davenport and Bonnie Doon. That was about 120 acres by the time we contained it the next day. But that was fully contained by the time that this fire really blew up to what most people know. So anyway, like I said, I'd just like to illustrate the point of the big fire that everybody came to know was really out of 3 fires that grew together. The vast majority of them were extinguished. The other thing I want to touch on really quick while we're on this slide is the name, because we've got a lot of questions about the name. How do we come up with CZU August Lightning Complex? So there's 21 operational units throughout the state of California for CAL FIRE. The San Mateo-Santa Cruz unit that we're all in here is called CZU. It's a 3-letter identifier that all the units have. So when we have a multiple fires that we manage under one structure, it's called a complex. So you can see the number of fires that are on this map. We can't, name each and every one of those things. So we group them all together, and for this, it was called the CZU August Lightning Complex. So just little semantics, but we get asked quite a bit, so I figured I'd cover it. The next slide, please, Chief. So this is one other fire that semi should have been on that map that I just showed you. This is the Waddell fire. And this picture was taken from San Mateo County looking south on Highway 1. And if you aren't terribly familiar with the area, this was just north of the Waddell Creek drainage, the Rancho del Oso area. And this fire was actually the most immediate threat, if you will. Granted, it wasn't a looming threat by any means because it was a small, slow growing fire. But this was the closest fire to the communities of Last Chance. We had this fire staffed from the first day on the 16th. And we had it nearly contained. We had folks on it, like I say, continuously, and it was almost contained on the 18th when when those 3 other fires really grew into the large fire. And unfortunately, we had to pull the resources off of the Waddell fire to go help fight fire in Last Chance. Next slide, Chief. So moving into Monday, August 17th, what we really had was there were those handful, there were a bunch of those little small fires that unfortunately we still have to have some sort of resource on. We can't just walk away from fires after they're deemed out. We really need to patrol them for a day or two to make sure that they don't come back when no other resources are around. So we do our best to spread those resources out. Sometimes an engine can patrol 2 or 3 fires. But what we really had on day 2, on the 17th, was 5 fires that we were staffing in a larger capacity. 2 of those being the Waranella and the Waddell fire. And then the other 3 were in San Mateo County in uninhabited forested areas. And you can see here on this map, 2 of those fires named under that lightning complex plan was the 5-15 and the 5-18. The other one that's off this map that does come into play is the 5-14. Those are the three that really merged and grew to be the large fire. So all of these fires were 80 plus acres, anywhere from 80 to 200 acres. With the exception of those two that were on the Santa Cruz County coast, these ones that were out in the forested lands of San Mateo County were really inaccessible. They're all in heavy timber. They were all moving at a slow rate of spread at this time on the 17th still. The one major thing, and you're going to continue to hear it, was we had limited resources. We really had a limited capacity to actually staff these fires. So moving into the 17th, we actually had the same folks that had been up since 3 a.m. on the day before on the 16th are still staffing these fires on the 17th because we just couldn't get enough resources into the county due to the drawdown throughout the state. So we were placing large resource requests. Unfortunately, those requests largely went unfilled, again, just because of the volume of fires throughout the state. One thing I'll indicate, so this map that you guys are looking at is the actual branch director, our field supervisor's map that he was using that day. And you might be able to see that pink outline that kind of surrounds those two fires. And that goes along some ridges, other topographical features and roads. That was his planned containment. That was what he felt that if he had the resources that he needed, this would be a reasonable containment box to contain this fire. Unfortunately, we just didn't have those resources available to us. Next slide, Chief. So here's just an aerial photo. One thing we did get on the 17th, we had the ability to get a couple of helicopters here, which was really pretty impressive because there weren't a whole lot available in the state, and we were lucky to get them just because of the inaccessibility of these fires. We knew that aircraft was going to be critical if we could just help keep these fires at bay until we could get ground resources on them. So in this photo, you can see just by that smoke production, it was an understory burn. So what we mean by that is that's all that ground litter and fuel, basically all the dead things that have been falling out of trees for dozens, going on nearly 100 years, because a lot of this area doesn't have recorded fire history. We don't have record of wildfires in those areas. So that's all of that stuff that's laying on the forest floor. That's actually a good thing in this respect. You can see that next bullet point where it says no crowning. So what we talk about with a crown fire is not just a single tree burning or one or two trees burning, but that's when all of the treetops are burning and it's going for, very quickly from tree to tree to tree to tree. The crowning is really the activity that some folks, unfortunately, saw late the night of the 18th or moving into the 19th, even a little bit still in the 20th. Those crown fires are move so rapidly and forcefully that there's nothing we can do about them until that fire comes back down to the ground. Unfortunately, on the 17th, one thing that further hampered our ability to get additional resources was that there were some other fires in the Bay Area, and I'll talk about them at the end of the presentation. But they really grew exponentially. We had a fire to the east of us in Santa Clara, as well as a fire that was rapidly expanding in the North Bay area, in Sonoma County, that fire particularly is in a well-populated area already. And so that really drew some resources that would not become available to us. Next slide, Chief. So again, on the 17th, having those helicopters available to us is a great tool. It gave us the ability to get in the air and get some good aerial reconnaissance. So we're able to fly the fire and really see their locations and what the threats were at that time and what the projected threats were to be over the next couple of days. At that point, we could tell those fires in the forested lands were going to give us some challenges to get into once we could get the resources pulled off of these other smaller fires. We knew that we were going to be committed to those for at least a few days, or so we thought. And so we requested a Type 3 incident management team that day. And that incident management team is a interagency team of individuals here in the South Bay area. And the main focus of that is just to help us with some of the planning and logistical functions as far as tracking resources, putting together our daily plans, supporting the firefighters logistically with all the tools and supplies and everything that they need. We continued to request additional resources between Monday the 17th and moving into the morning of the 18th, where the fire would eventually blow up that evening. We had resource requests for over 150 fire engines that we would never get. So on the 17th, we were also beginning to engage a little more heavily with the sheriff's offices, county administrative offices, and OES functions for both counties, knowing that this would likely be a lasting event. Still at this time, those fires just weren't moving fast, and you'll see in a couple of our progression slides that those first couple days, for the amount of fires we had, just wasn't a ton of acreage, at least not in our minds. Next slide, Chief. So here's a map of the 5 fires that we had that day on the 17th that were still active for us. You see the Warrenella down at the very bottom of the map there. I don't know if it's covered by your guys' little zoom functions. You can see the Waddell on that North Santa Cruz County coast. And then you can see those 3 fires that I've been mentioning that really grew together to be the large fire. So on the 17th, still, they were still in San Mateo County. They were relatively small. I'll show you a graphic in a minute that shows that the topography they were sitting in was actually pretty favorable for us. But those 3 fires, that 5, 14, 15, and 18 were the ones that would really grow to give us a lot of trouble. They were also at that point near populated areas of San Mateo County. So those were really where we were keeping an eye on at that point. And next slide, Chief. So a couple of things with this map. Number one, I hope that you guys can kind of ingrain this map in your mind, because we're going to show you this map a couple other times throughout the presentation as the fires begin to grow. And it might help you kind of gain a grasp of just how much they were growing each day. Again, you see the Warrenella and the Waddell, and you see those 3 fires. Now those couple, the 5-18 and the 5-15 are those ones furthest on the north. And this is a topographical relief map, so it shows us like mountains and valleys and so forth. And what we see with this map is those 2 fires are sitting on the lee side of that ridge, and they were just slowly backing down. And again, we showed you those pictures, but they were slowly backing down through that ground fuel and just down into that little river drain. I believe that's the Pescadero Creek drainage. And you can see that day, that was a total of 861 acres at that point on the 17th. Next slide, Chief. So I'll hand it back to Chief Larkin here in a second. He'll take you through the next couple days of the fire. But I'll leave you with this photo. This was taken late in the day on the 17th. So this is just about 24 hours before the fire really began to merge and really begin to move quickly and into our populated areas, particularly into the San Lorenzo Valley and Bonnie Doon. And what we can see from this photo, like I said, it's still, it's that understory burn. It was burning fairly cleanly in that. We don't see a lot of crowning in this. One thing that we do see in this is that smoke's really starting to lay down. And granted, this was taken in the evening when that offshore wind would pick up, but it was really starting to lay down, and that does a couple of things for us. One, it's an indicator that eventually we would see that wind would really pick up and drive the fire. But the other thing that happens with that wind when the smoke lays down is it makes it difficult for us to fight fire with aircraft, just when they aren't able to see and get into particular areas. So just another challenge that we had to deal with. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Chief.
Thanks, Chief Armstrong. So I'm going to kind of carry you through the next couple of days. On the 18th, the 3 fires that were burning in San Mateo County that we had referenced, 518, 513, and 514, they continued to burn in a southerly direction, as you can see indicated in this picture. And mostly it was still an understory burn. We did have some isolated trees that would torch out, but for the most part, the fire was still on the ground. It had not reached into the canopies. But we did notice that the fire did start to burn in a little bit greater intensity here on the 18th. And based on these indications here, I just want to give retrospect to, CAL FIRE has 6 incident management teams that help us manage these large scale incidents. Multiple teams had already been deployed in the state on other fires that were much larger in size than what we were dealing with here in the unit. We'd already had our Type 3 incident management team that had helped stand up our organization here. But we went ahead and make the request for a Type 1 incident management team to come into the unit to help facilitate the management of this incident as our complexity started to grow. To my next slide here, sorry about that. So as we progressed on the 18th, fire activity started to increase throughout the day. We started to see much more fire activity, as well as we started to experience spot fires in multiple areas, which is a great concern of ours. So as Chief Armstrong had mentioned, each operational period, we have resource requests to go out, and those resource requests were basically unfilled. So we have folks that are still on the line at this point, the morning of the 18th, that had been out there from the very beginning, the early morning of the 16th. So they're running on 48 plus hours of being on the line, and it really started to hit us as a safety concern. So we did have to make a decision whether to leave folks out there or pull them off the line. And we did have to pull some of our resources off the line so that we could get them some adequate rest and get them some food, so that we didn't get any of our firefighters hurt. As I said, we started getting multiple spot fires, and as the day progressed, we talked about this map. So the increase in acreage overnight from the 17th to the morning of the 18th, the fire had grown approximately 4,700 acres. As you saw in those pictures before with the smoke laying down, it really was a difficult indicator of trying to get a good accurate spot of how far the fire had actually burned to the south. But with ground resources in place and what aerial aircraft we had, mainly helicopters, that we were able to fly on the fire in the perimeter due to the smoked out conditions, we were able to ascertain that these were what our approximate perimeters were. On this day, as you can see to the very far south, the Warrenella fire had little to no growth, but the Waddell fire had some growth, but at that time we had what we anticipated to be adequate resources to try to contain that fire. As the day progressed on the 18th, the fire continued to grow in intensity, and it started to have a greater concern to the point where we had engaged with both of our sheriff's departments in both counties on the evacuation processes and what was going to need to take place for those to occur. And those evacuation orders were initiated on the 18th. It started in San Mateo County as that had the most immediate need, and that San Mateo County Sheriff's Department started those evacuation process. In the meantime, we were working with Santa Cruz County Sheriff's Department on our evacuation plan, putting that in order and getting those notifications out to the residents. I just want to kind of backpedal just a short bit here with this picture. This is a picture of Cloverdale Road looking back to the south from the Pescadero area. And then you can see that we were starting to get increased fire buildup of the fire as the day progressed. This is another photo a little bit later in the day, just about before dusk. You can see that we were starting to get those increased fire runs on the perimeter of the fire and in the interior where these 3 fires are starting to burn together and consume all that fuel and put up that significant column of smoke. And all along this time, evacuation orders were being initiated. Reverse 911s were going out. And this is a little bit later in the evening on the 18th. As I said, evacuation orders had already been initiated in the Boulder Creek area, Upper Bonnie Dune, the North Coast, as well as the ridge line of Skyline because we weren't really sure where this fire was going to pick up and run to. If you're very familiar with that area, it has very deep terrain, and that fire could have ran in multiple directions. Firefighters, like I said, had already been double shifted. We had put them down to bed them down for rest for safety purposes. But at this point, we had to make a very, very difficult decision on what was the priority. And the priority was life safety. We had evacuations initiated. So we made the decision to wake all those firefighters out of bed and put them back out on the line. The fire continued to make runs to the south this evening. As you can see on the picture on the right, or I'm sorry, on the left of your screen is a picture looking up from upper 236 above Big Basin. As you can see, significant fire runs were occurring. And then if you look at the picture to the right, that's a picture from Pillar Point Harbor looking back to the south. So you can see how that fire had made some significant runs during that period of time. So I'm going to show about a 16-second video for you all. This video may trigger some traumatic events or rehashing for some of the folks that may have been in an area where the fire was pretty significant. So I just want to make sure that if you do not want to view the video, if you can please turn off your sound and look away for about 16 seconds as I play this video. This video is of Big Basin State Park headquarters. We had those engine companies that were woken up out of bed were sent up into this area to help evacuate the campground there at Big Basin, and their escape route actually got cut off. And this is just a short video of the fire conditions that they encountered. So it was pretty significant there with the amount of fire that was in and around park headquarters as they were trying to protect what structures they could, but due to the fire intensity, most of those structures were destroyed. This is another photo of about 2 a.m. and the conditions that were out in the last chance area. As you can see, pretty significant crews out there trying to protect what structures they could. They had actually been pulled from the Waddell fire to be deployed over to the last chance area to try to protect as many structures as they possibly could. So as I had said, we had requested on the 18th, the CAL FIRE Incident Management Team. During the day of the 18th, the team was en route. They got into the CZU unit. We had done a debrief with them, or what we call an in-brief with them. We had basically given them the lay of the land. We had integrated a lot of their operational staff to go out and get the lay of the land and work with our current operational staff that was out on the ground to become more familiar with what was happening. And one of the things that took place that significantly changed the environment from the day before is we had a significant fire event. We had the fire spotting 6 miles in front of itself. The fire burned more than 43,000 acres in that 24-hour period. So the team came in and inherited a situation that was much different than what we had the morning before when we had actually requested them. This is a picture from an alert wildfire camera located up in the Bonnie Dune area. It's located off Patrick Drive. And just a note here is the timestamp on this camera. It's August 19th at around 11:22 at night. And those are just some indications of what those fire conditions were when that fire went through that area. Cursor to work here. So as I said, we talked about that original topographical map that we showed, and I just want to point out these dark green areas. Those were those initial 3 fires that caused some significant concerns that actually eventually burned down into this area, burnt together, and what progressed down to the south into Santa Cruz County and into the San Lorenzo Valley and the North Coast. it was a consumption of just over 43,000 acres in that 24-hour period. So this is just another indication on the 20th of what conditions we had. Fire had progressed, was continued to progress in a southerly direction. And as you can see, had significant buildups, full consumption of fuel in that area, and was making significant runs into the Bonnie Dune and down into, basically running the ridgeline above Boulder Creek all the way down into the Ben Lomond area as it made its way south. So by August 20th, evacuations were in full swing. They continued all the way into August 22nd. During that period of time, over 77,000 people had been notified and ordered to evacuate. This was the only option we had at this time due to our consistent lack of resources and not getting orders to fill. We had no resources to really get in and try to do perimeter control or structure protection. It was more so to try to get folks out and take action where we could to make any progress on the fire until we got additional resources in a few days later. So looking at the 20th, that growth between the 19th and 20th, still had a significant fire growth that day. It was about 15,300 acres. It's indicated in that lighter green. The fire was still pushing to the south. We did have some increases on the north coast, but the fire was primarily moving and continuing to push to the south. On the 21st, as you can see, fire progression was still moving. Some of this area over here, and this is where it was dropping down into Felton and Ben Lomond, where we were just starting to get resources in to really help us with that suppression effort and getting a perimeter control around here. On the 22nd, you can see that the growth was really starting to subside at that point. And then this is just real quick a summary of the progression of the fire from the start until I believe it's the 26th. So I'm going to start this this progression here. It'll start out with a bunch of red dots. Whoop, sorry about that. It'll start with a bunch of red dots. Those are the lightning strikes that had started fires. Then it'll progress to some underlayment colors that will give you the perimeters of each day. So those are the big progression days. As you can saw, it had that large progression, and then it continued to progress out over the next few days. Small progressions as we got more resources in and started to get our perimeters in. So as you can see, the perimeter control had really subsided, and we had not full containment, but pretty good containment on it as of the 28th. This is another progression I'm going to show you. This was just a progression of the evacuations as those evacuations were conducted, and the fire perimeter will be underneath that progression for the evacuations. These are strictly evacuations that we're capturing here. So this is fire kind of building up. And as you start to see those red and orange boxes, those are the evacuation zones that were ordered to evacuate based on the day. So the yellow indicates that those are evacuation warnings, and the red is evacuation orders, which were carried out during this process. Pretty quick here, you'll start to see some green show up, and that is part of the repopulation where we started allowing residents back into their homes based on the perimeter control and the safety that we felt that the fire was not going to progress any farther to the south and to the east. It took a while for us to get the evacuation orders lifted. Obviously, there was a significant amount of infrastructure that was damaged during this fire, and that had a lot to do with us being able to get folks back in because we needed to make it safe for everybody once they got back into the area. So, and as of to date, we still only have one zone that is in a mandatory evacuation. And that is, you can see here, this didn't progress all the way to the end, but is the one zone in Big Basin State Park, which is still closed as the highway is closed. So we still show it remaining closed. With that, I'll turn it back over to Chief Armstrong.
So I just want to spend the next couple of minutes or next couple of slides going over a little bit of information on our resources that we did have or lacked for this event. And the one thing, you know, that's a constant thing that we've heard is that we didn't have enough stuff on this fire. And what you're hearing from us tonight is that we absolutely agree. Chief Larkin and I agree wholeheartedly. We did not have enough resources of pretty much any type on this fire. And we knew that from the beginning. We were constantly trying to get additional resources in. So what I want to go over with this slide was just as a handful of things. What you're looking at is a couple of things: the daily progression of the acreage, the daily progression of the containment, and the total number of personnel actually assigned to the incident. One thing I like to have people note on the total number of personnel assigned is that's the total number of personnel assigned. Remember that you know, our firefighters typically work 24 hours on, 24 hours off, because they have to have some sort of rest at some point. So they rest a day and come back out. For the first couple of days of this fire, they weren't getting that. They were on it the full time. But the other point of that total personnel assigned, there's a percentage of that that's not actually firefighters on the line too. That's folks that are supporting the operations and everything. Those are assigned to the fire, but not on the fire line. Another thing I like to point out is the containment. Chief Larkin mentioned at the beginning of this, we base all incidents, whether it be a vehicle accident, a hazmat, a small fire, a large fire. We have 3 incident priorities that we go in order: life safety, property, and environment. And until we take care of protecting the life safety of ourselves and the citizens, we can't move on to protecting property and resources. Yeah, sometimes we can do that together, but when we have a significant life threat, we have to address that. So for the first couple of days of the fire and into the evacuations, when we still had a lot of folks in those populated areas, they shift our mindset a little bit in making sure that they're safe before we can really protect the homes. So like I said, we were taxed on resources. We had taxed all of our volunteer companies, all the local agencies from the Valley agencies of Boulder Creek, Ben Lomond, Felton. We're all engaged in structure defense with these. All of our other local cooperators like Santa Cruz City, Scotts Valley, everybody was on this fire, especially the night that it really blew up on the 18th. I think the city departments essentially had like 1 engine left in Santa Cruz, protecting the entire city and so forth. So they were giving us everything they had. It just wasn't enough. And the other thing, and I'm sorry I didn't mention it in an earlier slide, but if a lot of you folks have been here long enough, you're familiar enough with the geography. Remember that day, the resources that we had on the fires, they were out on logging roads in the San Mateo forest, essentially. So when this fire got up and ran towards Boulder Creek and the rest of the San Lorenzo Valley, those resources weren't on the fire line. They had to drive all the way, you know, come off the line, drive down Highway 1 and come in. So there was some lag time. So that's when we were really bringing in, we were calling in everybody that we had, and Chief Larkin might go over that as well when he mentions, when he talks about the mutual aid system. So we had absolutely everything available to us at the time from the local agencies. The mutual aid system in California, we're highly reliant on that mutual aid system. So a lot of folks don't realize Cal Fire at its peak of fire season, which we were in at this time, has 356 fire engines. That's it. It really doesn't seem like a lot in the grand scheme of things. That's statewide. Not all 356 of those fire engines can go to every single fire. So one thing we've heard a lot is that, you know, it was X number of days before I saw a Cal Fire engine. That's because we're highly reliant in these large fires on that mutual aid system and getting those local government agencies from throughout the state to help us out. Unfortunately, there's a lag time, right? For what you guys could hop in your car and drive 3 hours away, that takes us a day or two for those departments to be able to backfill resources and still protect their community, but send resources to help us. So while that mutual aid system is great, remember they were taxed too because there's all these fires statewide and everybody's asking for the same stuff. By the end of this incident, we would have crews from the National Guard on it. We had out-of-state resources. We had the furthest away was New Jersey. So we had folks from Arizona, Colorado, all over the place, but we had firefighters from New Jersey by the end of this. And if you think that doesn't take a little while to get, it absolutely does. Next slide, please, Chief. So this is just a snapshot. And granted, this is August 23rd. This isn't, you know, the day that our fire really blew up on the night of the 18th. But if you look at the start time or the start date on a lot of those fires, they were right about the same time as ours. And we show you this to emphasize, this is all the fires throughout the state that we were, what we say, in competition for resources. And so there's a statewide system. Oh, there we go. There's a statewide system that's implemented during fire season when there's a lot of fires going on. And it's cooperators from the state, federal, and local levels that prioritize fires for resources. And there are several factors that go into that, from the size in acres to the potential size, you know, life, structure, and infrastructure threats, and so forth. And so for the first 3 days, the 16th, 17th, 18th, we were in that pool with everybody else, and that group has a very regimented way that they rank these fires, and we were number 3 in the state. So we weren't going to get everything that we asked for, which is clear, but we were number 3 in the state. The day of the 19th, we became number 1. So that doesn't get us anything, but just to show you that there is a process to this, and we're kind of at the mercy of that process sometimes. Go ahead and advance forward there, Chief. So one thing I do like to show here is, like I said, we were strapped for resources. We absolutely agree. But when I started, you know, talking to folks at these other fires and started realizing our priority, we put this together. And this is just shows our fire, the CZU August Lightning Fire, as well as some neighboring fires that we were in competition for resources. That fire below us, going down that left-hand column, is the Santa Clara Lightning Complex. That was to the east of us in Santa Clara County, I believe in the Stanislaus County. The LNU Lightning Complex was the North Bay area, Sonoma. And you can see I don't have anything for the first 3 days because they were just handling that fire on their own. They're a large unit. They have a ton of resources available, and they were kind of managing that on their own. Didn't start reporting out yet. And then the final fire on the bottom there is the River Fire. That was in Monterey County, just to the south of us. So just a couple of things to note, like on the 16th, our fire was sitting at 300 acres. Santa Clara, just to the east of us, the River Fire to the south of us, almost 7 times the size of our fire, and we had more fire engines than they did, just barely, but we did. Moving into the 17th, when our fire was sitting at 861 acres, the Santa Clara Fire, the east of us, was almost 4 times our size, but we had 4 times as many fire engines. We had just many crews, and we actually got a couple of helicopters that day, whereas they had none. Just skipping ahead past the 18th, a couple of things to note on the 19th. One, our fire isn't the only one that grew exponentially that day. Yeah, it grew huge, but if you look at that Santa Clara fire, it went from 35,000 acres to 102. And that river fire, that was a little bit smaller. We went from 4,500 to 15,000. So all these fires grew at an exponential rate that night of the 18th and in the morning of the 19th. But specifically on the 19th, again, if you look at our fire at 49,000 acres, that Santa Clara fire was twice the size of ours, and we had 3 times the number of bulldozers, twice as many fire engines, more hand crews, 3 times as many helicopters, and so forth. So I could go on, but the picture I'm trying to paint here is we absolutely agree. We wanted, my partner Jonathan puts it well, we wanted firefighters coming in by the thousands, and we were getting them by the tens or the hundreds at best, which you saw in that previous graph I showed you. So unfortunately, at a drawdown like this that we experienced, it was just so hard to get. And back to you, Chief.
All right. Thank you, Chief Armstrong. And so just to give a quick recap summary of the events that led us up to this point. So we had, during our incident, we had put out over 112 informational press releases for the incident. And one of the things that once the team got here and we got really established, one of my priorities and one of my objectives for the team was to make sure that information was fresh and available. So we were doing 2-a-day incident briefings at 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. We were making sure that all the social media outlets that we utilize, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Nextdoor, were all fully functional and activated. One of the most sad parts about this fire is we did have one civilian fatality out in the Last Chance area. We evacuated over 77,000 people between the 2 counties, which was a monumental task. And to only have one civilian fatality is a testament to our sheriff's office for being able to get these folks out and get that messaging out to everybody to leave the area. The final acreage of the fire was 86,509 acres. 63,000 of that was in Santa Cruz County. And the remaining portion of that was in San Mateo County at 22,755 acres. There was 1,490 structures destroyed in this fire. 1,431 of those were in Santa Cruz County. And of that, 911 of those in Santa Cruz County were single-family dwellings. At the peak of our fire, we had just over 2,400 firefighters assigned. That peak was very fast before we started to see a decline due to those other fires in the state that started to break out after our fire had started to draw resources away pretty quickly based on the priorities and our success at getting containment once we got resources here to accomplish that. This is the largest fire in Santa Cruz recorded history. So that was something very significant that none of us ever wanted to see, but it happened. During this fire, we had infrastructure affected significantly. We had bridges destroyed, power lines, and our telecommunication infrastructure was damaged pretty heavily during this fire. We remained on this incident for months, and just in our last few months in January, even with the wind events we had here, we still had some areas out in the remote areas of the fire, in the well interior areas where we had fires that had popped up, where there's still hot material out there that hasn't fully burnt out yet or been fully extinguished by the rains. So we've been out there trying to contain those areas and make sure that those were out during that period of January when we had those storms that came through. And we burnt 100 acres in the month of January, which is unheard of for us here in Santa Cruz County. And then the fire is the price tag for it was a little bit over $68 million to fight the fire. And one of the key elements here is we exhausted all of our local resources. I'm the OES Operational Area Coordinator for Santa Cruz County. And during this fire, we had engaged all of our local cooperators throughout the county to assist us with this fire, and our local fire agencies in the neighboring counties of San Mateo, Santa Clara, to provide resources to us. It got down to the point where we were calling backdoor bro deals and calling our neighbor to the east and saying, hey, can you just give us a few engines for the night so we can try to protect structures? And they would say, hey, I can give you a few engines. They would send them on over, and we would be the good partner, and we would let those engines go back at the end of that requested time frame. But they were very instrumental in helping us with specific task-oriented suppression efforts on this fire. So this is just an aerial photo of the burnt aftermath, looking back from the south towards the north. Just a devastating fire. It consumed a lot of forested land, a lot of homes that are in the rural environments. Just a devastating fire. You know, the sheer lack of resources. Honestly, I think that if we could have gotten a lot more engines here a lot sooner, it would have been a much different story. And as we paint that picture of the lack of resources, which I'm going to cover here in just a minute when I talk a little bit about lessons learned, I was the initial attack IC on the Lockheed fire, which was burnt about 8,000 acres in 2009. And during that fire, the next morning when I walked into briefing, we had about 800 fire personnel at our briefing that morning. As you saw in our presentation, our next morning briefing consisted of about 300 total people on the fire that was spread out in a much more geographical area. But within 72 hours, we had over 1,500 people on the Lockheed fire. Here, it took us almost 12 days to have that number of people on this fire. So that just gives a sure testament of the drawdown of resources statewide. So moving on to our lessons learned. When we look back at this fire, one of the key indications that we look back on is our fuel conditions. So our fuel conditions have never presented us with this type of fire conditions in the history of the 100 years of recorded fire history that we have here in CZU during the CZU lightning complex. You know, this is continued years of drought and climate change. This is requiring us to have to revisit how we look at our fuels. You know, we have been noted here on the Central Coast to kind of be the asbestos forest. Fires just don't burn here because of our mild climate and the high fuel moistures we get due to our, you know, great rain seasons that we have here. But we haven't experienced that in many, many years. So it's really having an effect on how we are going to look at our fuels moving forward with those conditions and how they're going to carry fire and how we make decisions based on that. The lightning event, as we indicated, we have a lightning coordination plan that was implemented as it was designed. Everything worked as it was. We exercised that plan. We had resources out, as we said, some of them in pickups with shovels, out trying to contain as many of these 27 fires that we had. We had engaged our local cooperators. You know, I know we had folks from Boulder Creek and Zayante out on fires for multiple shifts to help contain these fires in a small area. Well, these fires that were in the more remote areas, we had more difficulty in because we actually had to cut our way into those fires because there is really a limited access to that. But the one thing that our lightning plan, we weren't able to do, we weren't able to execute that plan as it was designed because of the lack of resources. So the design is you search out and find these small fires and you bombard it with resources, put the fires out where they're small, and everything's good. But that's the one thing that we're looking back at that, and the lack of resources really made a difference there. Evacuations. This is another big item that we're looking at, and how we reference our evacuations based on our fuel conditions. You know, these rates of spread that we saw in this fuel that we've never seen burn like that in this area of the state is really having to, we're having to look back at that and say, based on what we've seen and what we know, evacuations will need to be considered and conducted much earlier in fire events in the future so that we can get people out of harm's way in the event that we have the lack of resources. But also the consideration is these are narrow mountainous roads that we all live in this area. and it's difficult to get large number of people out in a very quick period of time. And that's one of the things that we're considering now. And then infrastructure failures. With the damage that was caused prior to or during the lightning event, there was a lot of trees that were blown down and infrastructure was damaged in power lines as well as telecommunication during that. That had significant impacts on our ability to communicate with the public. The infrastructure, in the far remote areas of the rural communities, or even some of the just remoter areas of the community, all that stuff is ran on battery backups, a lot of it, and that infrastructure is old and it hasn't probably been maintained probably to the level it should be. But those batteries don't last as long as they do, and those systems start to fail much earlier in this event, as we saw, and then the damage that it sustained just in the fire in itself. That really hampered our ability, like I said, to notify the public. So we're looking at what things we can do to provide that notification much earlier in that process. The Code Red system, which is our county reverse 911 system. One of the things with reverse 911 systems, they're an opt-in system. So in order to be a part of that reverse Code Red 911 system, you have to actually physically go in and register in that system to receive those alerts on your cell phones and things of that nature. So that's really troublesome because there wasn't a whole lot of folks in the county that had actually went in and registered. I think the number was about 17,000 countywide that had registered for Code Red prior to the fire. The other thing that we found with Code Red is the evacuations were in progress. The reverse 911 system, which is handled through NetCom, which is our regional dispatch center in Santa Cruz, they found that the system had a throttle on it. So it would not allow the number of calls to go out as what we had anticipated. So they were able to work with the vendor and get that throttle increased to expedite those calls and get more calls out more timely during the incident. Going to talk a little bit about the California mutual aid system. I know Chief Armstrong talked about it, but California has a robust mutual aid system, fire mutual aid system. And during times like this, we had 12,000 lightning strikes that caused 585 fires. 24 of those fires became major events that basically drew all those available resources in. And when we talk about the system in place that prioritizes how resources are allocated, this is all part of that mutual aid system and how those are allocated. And as Chief Armstrong indicated, we were number 3rd on that allocation, but you got to remember we weren't number 3 until almost 3 days into this lightning event, which a lot of those resources had already been deployed to other fires in the state. We were getting some resources, but they were coming in very, very small increments at that time. Our evacuation platform. So the Santa Cruz County has a evacuation management platform. This platform was developed after the Summit, Martin, Trabing, and Lockheed fires of 2008 and 2009. This version of the platform was used to initiate our evacuations, but very quickly we found we were in the process of transitioning to a new platform called Zonehaven. We were able to transition seamlessly to the Zonehaven platform, which brought us a few new items that we could do. We actually had visible items that were available to the public almost instantaneously. When we were evacuating a zone, the zone would be changed and it would allow more of a public facing side of what was actually going on as far as evacuations. And that was used, both those systems were used in the successful and safe evacuation of over 58,000 Santa Cruz County residents and 19,000 San Mateo County residents. Fuel reduction efforts. Our fuel reduction efforts have been very difficult to achieve. I'll be the first to admit it. It's a difficult process in a county like Santa Cruz. Though a lot of work has been done, there's a lot more work that has to be done. And this is going to require a cooperative effort by all. The engagement of all of our communities, our resource conservation districts, our fire safe councils, and really starting to leverage, trying to be able to get some funding here to help with that fuel reduction effort through grants and other funding mechanisms. our individual property owner defensible space inspections. These are called LE100 inspections. These are where we come out and make sure you've got your 100-foot or 30-foot of clearance based on our defensible space criteria. Those inspections aren't where they need to be. And, you know, really we need to have a greater emphasis on gaining compliance with our residents in that program because really that defensible space is key to us being able to provide any kind of structural protection when we do have resources here to provide that protection. Then our fire prevention messaging, you know, that's another key one is we probably don't do enough of this in getting information out to the public on what to be prepared for and how to have a plan and your go bag and the ready, set, go compliances and just overall fire prevention messaging of when fire season's coming, how to prepare for that and what things to be ready for. So we're looking at methods of trying to increase that messaging to better serve the public under that format. So with that, that concludes our presentation with our lessons learned. So we're going to go ahead and start our comment, question and answer session here. One thing I will say, we do have a time, we're going to try to get as many questions in as the time we have remaining. But if for some reason we are unable to answer your question, please use the question and answer function within Zoom. We are being provided all the questions that are answered or that are asked so that we can provide answers to them, even though we may not be able to get them all asked and answered in the presentation. You can also send comments or questions to an email address that we have made available to you. It's called CZU Fire Questions, all one word, CZU Fire Questions @fire.ca.gov. And that we'll be monitoring that to help try to answer some questions. You will receive with the email you provided when you registered for the webinar here, you will receive a survey that will have a list of questions and some areas where you can add comment to that so that we can get your feedback that way and try to answer questions if we weren't able to do it. And then lastly, if you, my name is Ian Larkin, I am the unit chief. I provided you my contact number to my office. It's area code 831-335-6700. If you have comments or you would like to talk to me directly about a specific question or item, I'd be more than happy to accept your call. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Deputy Chief Jonathan Cox to facilitate our question and answer session.
Thanks, Chief. Now we'll have some time to answer questions. You'll be able to speak and ask your question in a couple of different ways. Due to the number of questions that we anticipate, we are asking that you limit your question to just one. We'd like you to encourage to use the secondary methods if you have multiple questions, including the survey as well as the CZU Fire Questions @fire.ca.gov. We'll answer questions in two ways and we'll alternate in between the two. The first is if you use the raise hand function on the phone or the Zoom, we will be able to monitor the hands that are raised and call upon you. You'll be unmuted and you'll be able to ask your question. If you dialed in using a phone, you can hit *9 and then *6 to unmute and mute. The secondary way to ask questions is through the Q&A chat function. If you vote for the question, if someone has the question that you'd like answered, you can vote for it and upvote the questions, which we will see at the top and get to. We'll be alternating between the two methods to hear as many questions as possible. Again, if we're unable to get to your question, please be sure to use the Q&A function and we will capture those questions and answer them at a later time. You can also get your question answered by emailing czufirequestions@fire.ca.gov. All right, this is your opportunity to ask questions and get answers. We just ask again for professionalism and courtesy with your specific questions and note that disruptions will not be tolerated. With that, we will start by answering questions through the raised hand function. And we will start with Jacqueline Hendricks.
Hi, thank you for holding this forum tonight. Really appreciate it. So my question is that on your YouTube channel, you feature a video of the Lomamar volunteers on scene on August 16th at 11:51 of Utano Ridge in San Mateo County. Yet in your presentation tonight, you were saying that the fires in that area in those 3 regions were inaccessible. And how do you kind of justify the difference here in what you're reporting both on your YouTube and in your report tonight? Thank you.
Question. Thanks, Jacqueline. And I'll pass that to Chief Larkin.
Yeah, Jacqueline, thank you for your question. I appreciate it. So most of the fires that were in that general area of San Mateo County, they weren't fully inaccessible. There was a couple of them that had burned down to a couple access roads up on the Butno. But 2 of the primary fires had very, very difficult access that we were actually having to cut our way in to those fires. And some of those fires, I'm not sure exactly when the picture had been taken, but the fires had burned down to a couple of the road systems a day into the fire, but the vast majority of them had to be cut into. So not necessarily saying they're fully inaccessible, but we did have very difficult access into numerous fires in that area.
All right, next question we'll take is from Forrest.
What I'm hearing is that there seems to be a big discrepancy between what CAL FIRE is reporting as fact and what people on the ground experienced as fact. And I'm wondering when there will be an actual public meeting or debrief with the public where we can actually hammer out what really did and did not happen and at what time those events occurred.
Yeah, Forrest, thanks for your question. So what I can say to that is the information that we're providing is the information that we have. We're not fabricating, we're not, the information you may be getting may be coming from different sources that had different experiences. So these are coming from our folks that were on the line and information that we have at our disposal to provide the information we have in this presentation. Thank you for the question. And there are no additional meetings planned at this time.
All right, next we will go to Bree Driver.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. Could you please address the local firefighter response and how CAL FIRE worked with those resources? Did you work with the Boulder Creek, Ben Lomond, and Felton fire departments? These were readily available resources that were familiar with the area. And also, will working with local fire departments be a part of future plans? And how will they be involved in the future processes with CAL FIRE? Thank you.
Thanks, Bree.
Yeah, Bree, thank you for the question. We do work very closely with our local cooperating fire agencies, as you mentioned, the Boulder Creek, Ben Lomond, and Felton fire districts. And during this incident, all 3 agencies were brought into unified command at some point. In the early stages, when we were out suppressing the smaller lightning strike fires, all those agencies were actively involved in the assistance in suppressing those fires. So we have a great relationship with those folks at all those agencies. And as I said, they were all part of the unified command structure when the incident escalated. So they had an active role in the suppression efforts for the fire.
Chief Armstrong, did you want to add anything to that, or were you just turning? All right. We'll take one more hand raised question, and let's go to MC Dwyer for the next one.
Hi, I just want to say I really appreciate getting information from your perspective. It does help understand what happened, that this fire did literally explode overnight. Just a couple of points. The evacuation strategy through Code Red. We received an evacuation notice that said there was a fire in Lomamar. And when I looked at that on the map, that was like so far away. I mean, we took it seriously. We got out. And I'm really grateful that, you know, there was only one person that died. So, you know, obviously your evacuation worked, but I'm just letting you know it was not very specific. It said it was an evacuation we didn't understand the difference between an advisory and a mandatory. So that's just a note. I do want to address something I saw in the Q&A several times. There are a lot of rumors that the local firefighters were overruled by CAL FIRE and were not allowed to defend neighborhoods. Can you speak to that?
If that occurred, I'm unaware of it. To answer that question is we were actively engaged. I know the local fire agencies had committed resources to the incident through the Unified Incident Command Structure, and they had also taken action in their own communities with additional resources to protect assets within their fire districts, which is to their legal right to do. So that's about all I can speak to that. They were actively engaged, and I'm unaware of them ever being told that they could not participate. So what I can say on the evacuation messaging, in the early phases of this, I know some of the messaging may have been confusing, as it indicated the fire in Lomamar had been the fire that actually had made its way and burned down into Santa Cruz. Those three fires had merged and burnt down into Santa Cruz County. So we are trying to tighten up that messaging in that process. So I know some of the messaging that went out early on may have been confusing. And I know that's one of the other items that we are looking at in our evacuation management platform, is to provide better education for the public. And as I mentioned, we are transitioning to this new platform called Zone Haven. And in that process, we will be rolling out a Know Your Zone campaign. So to educate folks, the public, on more which each of those type of indications mean, whether it's a warning or if it's an order. And currently we have an advisory status in place for any of those areas that might have a debris flow consideration. So that's part of our goal here in our fire prevention messaging, is to roll that out with our Know the Zone campaign, along with our local cooperating fire agencies that are part of the Zone Haven product that will be rolled out here in the very near future. Thank you for the question.
All right, next question we'll take from the Q&A in the chat, and that is from Linda Garfield. If you have the technology to measure moisture content in forest fuels reliably and are fully aware that we're in a multi-year drought amidst scientifically proven climate change, please explain why CAL FIRE was caught off guard by how quickly this fire blew up, particularly when the current weather was as you explained.
And I'll be happy to field it, Chief Cox. So Linda, thank you for the question. And I think we kind of may have answered in bits and pieces, but I'd like to tie it together a little bit. We use all the tools available to us. And one of the most reliable things for us is, or a couple of most reliable things for us, historical data and real-time data. So for the first couple days of this fire, like we mentioned, it was really burning very slow and everything. Not real intense fire by any means. And so we had that real-time data that we're looking at. Historically, like we said, the fires just haven't seen, and you know, it's a perception that everybody has, that or used to have anyway, that redwood forests were fairly resilient and didn't burn with the intensity that we saw here. Chief Larkin mentioned that you know, this fire burned 43,000 acres in less than 24 hours. After this fire was over, I asked our fire captain that tracks the stats and everything and data and the footprints of all these fires, hey, how many years do we have to go back to have burned 43,000 acres? And he says, it's really easy. I already checked. Never. He said, we have 100 years of recordable fire history in the San Mateo-Santa Cruz unit, and we haven't collectively ever burned 43,000 acres. So to answer your question, yeah, we were caught off guard to that extent, because this fire did something that we had never, ever seen before, and nobody had in this area. And Chief, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, you know, I was just going to add that not necessarily being caught off guard. If we would have had adequate resources earlier in the fire, we would have been able to get in and suppress these fires before they were able to grow in size and intensity. What did catch us off guard is how rapidly they were able to expand. We had never seen our redwood forest burn like they did, and it was alarming to us when we saw that. And that's in our lessons learned. We've conveyed that we are really having to look into the future based on this drought and climate change that we're seeing, how we react and how we plan and prepare for that type of event to occur if it ever occurs again. And I think the key element here is to remember that it's not every day that we get 12,000 lightning strikes that hit California, and our resources get drawn down due to the 585 fires and 24 major events. So it's not every day that we're going to see that. We go back to the Lockheed fire where we had 1,500 people within 72 hours here to fight that fire and kept it small, and we were able to contain it. And what I will revert back to in that 8-year period, or in 2008, or actually 2009 was a Lockheed, is one of the areas that we were able to contain the fire was at a redwood forest. The fire significantly slowed down when it hit that fuel type. So those are the things that we're taking into consideration as we look into the future.
All right. Next question, and this one kind of gets back to a little bit of the volunteers locally, is from Jamie Serralo. How did CAL FIRE protect his station in Jameson Creek, but not the water company next to it, or the entire neighborhood next to and around the station? And then can you address the rumors of CAL FIRE telling BCFD to back down from the Fallen Leaf neighborhood?
Yeah, so in relation to the Jameson Creek station, so what I can say is that area, that station has a great defensible space around it. There is not much vegetation in and around the building. It's got adequate clearances around there. So why that station is still standing, I know we had a resource in and around that area at the time, but I really don't have a good answer to that question other than it had good defensible space. It is constructed with a metal roof, so that may have played a factor into that. And I'm trying to reread this question here. As far as the question of having the Boulder Creek volunteers back down from Fallen Leaf, once again, I don't have any direct information and can't confirm if that actually occurred. I do not know, so I cannot answer that question. But I will try and get back to that, and I'll note who asked that and see if we can get a response from it.
All right, next question, we'll go to Beth Dyer. It's a 4-part question. So we'll start with number 1. We understand the resources from the state for firefighting this fire was limited. What was the backup plan when resource requests went unfilled, particularly early in the fire? At the time, what was CAL FIRE's policy on using local resources? And has that policy changed or might be changed going forward?
And I'll be happy to.
That's a lot to field. Do you want to field some of that, Nate?
Yeah, I'll cover some of that. And thank you, Beth, for the few questions. I might be able to cover all these, and if not, Chief will help me out here. So at the time, what was CAL FIRE's use? We absolutely use our local resources. So I know at least as of the morning of the 18th, we had 2 local government strike teams, which is a group of 5 engines and a leader out of our local government here. And that consisted of, the city of Santa Cruz, Scotts Valley, Central Fire Protection District, and other cooperators. So we did have those. I believe one was a strike team, was a task force, but that's semantics. So we absolutely had full engagement of the local resources as much as they were able to offer up. As far as how our local fire departments integrated in the firefighting efforts, I think that kind of stands. We got a little bit more. Like I said, everybody offered up what they could in those initial days, and that was even before the main body of fire was into Santa Cruz County. That night of the 18th, when the fire blew into Santa Cruz County, our local cooperators were absolutely tremendous. They threw absolutely everything they had at it. Like I said earlier, each of the major cities that have 3 to 4 fire engines in them at a time dumped everything into to this effort because they knew that we needed it. And then when were they integrated into unified command? I'm going to skip past that. I'm going to let Chief field because he might remember the exact date. But they were integrated immediately as far as when the fire did come into the community, as far as helping indicate the zones of their communities that needed to be evacuated in that effort. As far as what is CAL FIRE's policy regarding the use of trained volunteers, it's somewhat vague to me. But what I can say is CAL FIRE administers the Santa Cruz County Fire Department, and we do have 5 volunteer companies throughout the county, and they are they're trained to a high level, and we have to make sure that anybody that will be participating in firefighting is qualified and trained at that level. I know the question has come up of what seems to be kind of like the old days, almost what the forestry fire departments were founded on, where, you know, the boss would go down to the logging and mining camps and grab any willing body. And unfortunately, we just can't do that anymore due to, you know, liability and safety of yourselves and those folks. And as far as local CERT teams involved by CAL FIRE in the disaster response efforts, including the evacuations and firefighting, none of our local CERT volunteers are trained to any sort of firefighting level. And as far as evacuations go, we do have Chief Deputy Chris Clark on the line tonight. The evacuation effort is truly a law enforcement function, so Chief Deputy Clark might be able to answer that a little bit better. But one thing I can tell you is while they might be trained to help with evacuations and everything, we probably would not be comfortable putting them in an active fire situation, being that they do not have the training, protective equipment, and so forth. And Chief Deputy Clark, I don't know if you want to add on that at all.
No, thanks, Chief Armstrong. We had nearly 200 personnel that very next night. We had everybody we could the night of, and then tons of personnel the following night and the nights to follow. So I felt good about our staffing numbers from our evacuation standpoint. So hopefully that answered the question.
Okay, thanks, Chief Deputy Clark. I just have one item to answer to that. When it comes to the use of local resources, we had agencies, as Chief Armstrong stated, that committed heavy commitments, upwards of 75% of their department to helping fight the fire. And you know, we had folks that were coming back, asking to come back from vacation, refusing to leave the line. So the all-out effort of everybody involved, all the agencies here locally in Santa Cruz County, it was a monumental effort, from if they were only protecting their own district to the folks that were on the far edges of the lines out in the remote areas. Everybody was putting in 100% effort to try to get these fires under control, so that we would be able to bring some kind of safety back to the community.
All right, our next question is from Brian B. Were homes/neighborhoods systematically triaged? You've made clear that you were understaffed, but how did you deal with this fact and optimize the resources you did have? There are numerous reports of engines standing idle. Lastly, can you please give some further specifics on spotting? What was the criteria to prioritize these spot fires? All these answers will go to bettering future responses.
So let me try to break this question out. So were neighborhoods systematically triaged? So what I can say is later in the event, when we did get folks in, they were able to actually go in and do some structured triage and actually put, some may have seen these little yellow tags with triangles on them where folks had went in and actually triaged structures. So what I can say, when we had resources available to do that, they were absolutely out doing that, but that was later in the event. As I said, our 3 priorities are life safety, property, and environment. In the early stage of this, when this fire rolled down out of the unpopulated areas into the more populated areas of our rural communities, our main focus was getting people out of the way and protecting lives. That was our main focus. And then let me see if I can dig what else you have here. It's a multiple part question, which I see the
next part.
Person. So let's talk about the spot fires. So yeah, so this fire, once the fire got up into the crowns, there was ember cast that was carrying embers well in advance of the main fire that was actually starting smaller spot fires out in front of it that would grow in size. And then when the main fire would consume those spot fires, and those spot fires were preheating the fuel in front of the main fire, which allowed that fire to grow even much faster. So I'm not sure what the prioritization of a spot fire is, but when you have no resources to send anywhere to handle additional spot fire somewhere, the spot fire becomes part of the main fire. There is no way to prioritize those until we got additional resources in and could actually start perimeter control, which is our obvious primary objective when we do finally get resources in, as well as protecting structure. So if you can control the perimeter, you can make the fire go out. So those are our, some of our tactical objectives when we start talking about, allocating resources. But prioritizing the spot fires, that kind of came with the resources that we had and where we could focus people into that. How do we better our future and responses? And to answer that is, what I can say is history in this county for all the fires we've had, with the exception of this one fire, we have been able to maintain a small amount of structure loss. We did have the one civilian fatality on this fire, but it's because we had adequate resources. We had able to throw a lot of people and equipment at it to suppress these fires and keep them small. In the situations that we were faced with the sheer lack of resources, even our aerial assets, our helicopters, the first day, the ridge winds were so high, our pilots could not lift off and fly. They attempted numerous times at our request, and it was just too windy for our helicopters to fly during those first day of the fire, the 16th. And until the morning of the 17th, when the wind subsided, we were able to finally get helicopters up in the air. But the fire was laying down on itself, so it did hamper our ability to use aircraft for several days. Where we could effectively use it, we implemented it. Thank you for the question.
All right, next question comes to us about fuel and contractors. Diane Mischi. Please explain CAL FIRE's operational procedures and decisions to require outside flight contractors to sign contracts regarding aviation fuel, that they would not be reimbursed, though they are available to make water drops. These outside contractors were offering to assist, but they were not allowed to due to the requirements of the contracts, though the resources were limited and the state was in duress.
Yeah, that's a difficult question. I'm a little lost on the difference of the flight contractors versus the fuel contractors. So what I can say is our aviation assets, we have specific purchasing guidelines that are in place with contractors that are certified to provide aviation fuel. And aviation fuel that we would need for suppression of the fire or to support that suppression of the fire would already be allocated for all of our resources that we would have, especially our rotary wing, which are our helicopters. All of our aviation assets, air tankers and things, those refuel at an air base. So that fuel would be there. But to answer your question, those are contractual things that the state on a emergency basis can enter into. But I'm unaware of somebody that actually came to the incident base or anywhere where we would have had interaction with them to even make that request. So, it comes down to the contracting and what we can hire under that emergency basis. But aviation fuel, like I said, those assets, all of our helicopters are hired what we call wet. They have to provide their own fuel with the exception of our agency specific ships.
All right, and we'll take one more Q&A typed question before we go back to the raised hand feature. This comes from Betsy. And it's kind of a fire/law question. So many residents who know the terrain in the areas and ways into the forests were so willing to be of assistance. Why were locals not utilized? Second part to that is, why were locals arrested when they were the ones in there cutting fire breaks in BC?
And Chief, I'll be happy to field a little bit of that if you don't mind, before turning it over, or you can. But thank you for the question, Betsy. One thing I can say, we were absolutely using locals with their local knowledge that are trained firefighters and that were there equipped and part of the system and able to be utilized. We absolutely 100% use that local knowledge. I was there myself, utilizing the help of the folks from Boulder Creek Fire Department. As far as allowing local residents into an active fire area and not having them properly trained, equipped, et cetera, not held accountable to any sort of system, we just can't have it, because it affects their own safety as well as the overall operation. Like we mentioned before, if we're worried about the safety of somebody else, it's really hard for us to do the rest of the job of protecting the homes and everything. So we were absolutely using all information that was available to us through them. As far as locals being arrested, I am myself not familiar with any situation of that sort, but unfortunately, I'll kick that to Chief Deputy Chris Clark.
Yeah, thanks, Chief Armstrong. No, that's the short answer. We did arrest a number of people, obviously, for victimizing people in the fire area. As we said during the event, that people were trickling in, looking to do people further harm, and those people we were looking for, and we found them. And so we did arrest a number of people for looting charges, weapons charges, but no, we didn't arrest anybody for defending their property.
All right, we'll take a raised hand question from Joe Cucciara.
Thank you. With the admitted lack of resources, why were so many resources allocated to cutting the line to protect the university, which was already vacated because of COVID, and it's a state facility, and the state has far greater resources to rebuild than the individual homeowner or small businesses throughout the San Lorenzo Valley?
Joe, thank you for that question. So that contingency line that was put in down near the university, that was put in with bulldozers. So the number of resources that were utilized for that specific task were, I believe it was a total of 3 bulldozers that were used, and they were only there for a period of, I believe, 1 complete shift. So it took them 24 hours to push that line in, and that line was pushed in, if I'm not mistaken, on the 18th. That contingency line was put in around that area, and that was mainly to protect the fire as it was moving to the south, to try to have a preemptive line in place where we had a fuel type that we could actually get in and actually stop the progression of the fire. The area that fuel break was put in was in grass. Much easier to fight fire in grass, and that line would have potentially held that in check, so we could get resources in there to actually stop the front of the fire from progressing any farther into the city of Santa Cruz or down to the university. Thank you for the question.
All right, our next question will come from Mary Jo Walsh.
Yes, thank you. So I hear a lot of talk about the community members who wanted to help not being properly trained and the bureaucratic reasons why someone who is not properly trained would not be allowed back in on the fire line. And I'm wondering both, what is the hindsight on our lack of community resilience and our number of volunteers who were equipped to handle it? And what is the plan going forward to eliminate the bureaucratic hurdles that are holding us back from increasing the number of people who are resilient members of our local fire community resilience? Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mary Jo.
Yeah, Mary Jo, thank you for the question. I appreciate that. You know, that's a difficult question to ask and a difficult one to answer on top of that. So, you know, it really comes down to having people that are trained for an event. You know, we had a lot of folks that did stay behind and they were able to save structures and they were able to do some good work, I would say. But some of that good work comes at a cost. You know, in the midst of the fire, we had a secondary weather event that was predicted. They had predicted thunderstorms to roll through the area. We had a humongous, massive fire increase of 43. By that time, it was almost 48,000 acres that had ran through areas where it had dirty burn. It did not burn and consume the fuel completely. So it ran by so fast that it still had fire to burn. And with all the spot fires that we had, if we would have had that weather system come in and we had all these volunteers out there, which we did, and we started getting downbursts that started to blow this fire out even more, we were putting all those people in harm's way. Unfortunately, fortunately, the fact is that weather system did not materialize. And fortunately for us, it moved on and didn't cause any significant harm and nobody got hurt. But if that would have came through, the unfortunate event would have been, we probably would have had greater civilian fatalities based on that specific premise of that weather event that could have came in. So as we look into the future, you know, that's a difficult question that we need to talk about and find out what is available to us. But we have to put, as an agency, we have to put trained personnel out there that meet certain requirements. If we don't, we open ourselves up for tremendous liability and lawsuits. And we are the bureaucratic government, right? But we have to set balances and check measures in place for us to keep us in line and to make sure that our personnel and the people that we have out on those lines are trained. I'll use the example of a contractor. We at times as an agency hire contract crews, hand crews to come in, which I believe on this fire, we actually had a few that may have been here assisting with cutting fire line. All those crews have to meet a minimum standard of training in order to be hired and be put out on the line. So you know, that's a difficult question as we move and we look and we talk about resiliency and what that looks like. Like I said before, if we had the resources we had available to us to suppress these fires, we would not be having this conversation, right? But we are having the conversation. And can it happen again? There is potential. You know, as we look into the future right now of what our fuel moistures look like present day due to the lack of rain, I'm nervous about it as we move in. If we don't get more rain before the beginning of fire season, we have serious concerns in Santa Cruz and San Mateo counties with what our fire season potentially could look like as we move forward. So those are concerns that we all have. But the concern we have in greater detail is, you know, life is our number one priority and preserving that. And putting somebody in harm's way is just not something that I'm willing to do.
All right, next question is from Martin B.
Martin, you'll need to unmute yourself to ask your question.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. Hey, I wanted to thank you guys for holding this meeting, and I really appreciate everything that CAL FIRE did. I do have some questions that are kind of on a macro level, and it has to do with overall California budget. As I'm learning about fires and fires in California and how the insurance industry, it seems like after the Paradise Fire, they realized that there were some problems and they had to change some rules. We had the car fire in Redding, the fire in Santa Rosa, fires in Southern California. So lots of fires. And we heard our senators say on a debate stage in March how our state is on fire. And that was before our fire in Santa Cruz. And so part of my problem or part of my question would be, I noticed that our governor just recently had his budget come across for the coming up fiscal year. And he had 5 bullet points. And the last bullet point was to add $1 billion towards CAL FIRE. And so do you think that that is enough money to help the state, or is that still underfunded? And I know that that's a big question and I'm having difficulty saying it, but that's really, it's sort of a macro question, not a specific to our fire.
Great, thank you, Martin.
Yeah, Martin, thank you for the question, and I'll try to summarize that because it is a very difficult dive into how the state does their funding. But the governor does have $1 billion in his budget that was added to that, and a lot of that money is going to resiliency. It's going to fuel reduction and that resiliency program. So that not all of that funding is going to go to CAL FIRE to increase staffing. We are basically receiving some money this year to offset the cost for having to implement firefighting hand crews. So due to COVID and the release of inmates at the rate that has occurred in the state from prisons, our inmate population that we use for our inmate crews has drastically dropped to very, very low levels. I'll give you an example. Our inmate camp at Ben Lomond Camp up in Bonnie Doon is a 5-person or a 5-man camp. So we have 5 crews there. Right now we have 2 crews staffed because of the lack of inmates. So a lot of that money is going to replace some of those deficits that we have in capacity for the department to be able to provide emergency response. So some of that money goes to that. To offset those costs, but a lot of that money is going to be grant money that's available for resiliency programs for the communities to go after, and application process to secure funding for us to do fuel reduction and some other resiliency programs in our communities. But thank you for the question.
All right, next question. It's on the Q&A chat, and it's an evacuation-based question. It's from Antonia Bradford. My great concern is that there is such a lack of trust now in CAL FIRE that next time your evacuation compliance that will be incredibly low. How do you plan to work with the public to establish trust and partnership?
Yeah, great question, Antonia. That is a concern, right? And I'm not sure how the trust level has been dropped. Our sheer reliance on resources is the main factor why this fire grew to the level it did. But what I can say about the compliance of evacuations is I understand people are going to want to try to stay behind and defend their properties because we had a lack of resources. But what I can say to that is if we get more emphasis on fuel reduction, defensible space, and people's homes are prepared, they will feel more comfortable to leave those areas. What I can say as we move forward is when we ask people to evacuate, we're doing it for one reason. And as I said at the very beginning of my presentation, our priorities are life, property, and the environment. Your life is our #1 priority. So when we're evacuating you, we're evacuating people for a reason. It's to get you out of harm's way so that an approaching fire does not cause your death. So I would only hope that folks would realize that and really not make it a trust level with CAL FIRE because all we're doing is making the decisions to work with our sheriff's department, implement a plan, and then ask them to go affect those evacuations in the future. What I can say is we are going to be evacuating and implementing evacuation plans much earlier in a fire process, just due to our fuel situation that we have. Our fuels are much more volatile, as we described, due to continued drought and our continued climate change. And just the sheer lack of rain this year, like I said, I am concerned for what our fire season looks like moving forward.
All right, a question that has come up a few times in the chat, and it is in regard to rumors of backburns. Chief, I don't know if you want to hit on just any comments about firing. Yeah, so, as I stated, this question came up last night as well. So my comment to any of the backfires, we use fire in 2 ways, offensively and defensively. It is a fact that it is a tool that we use
to help control fires. There are several claims of different backfires that have occurred amongst the fire, and we have a couple complaints that we are looking into. So I'm really not at liberty at this point to discuss any of that ongoing inquiry, as it may hamper our abilities to get the truth. So we're looking into that and trying to find out what that looks like. So what I can say is backfires do occur. Backfires were most likely lit on this event in both an offensive and defensive fashion, and we're trying to narrow down which ones may have been done in a manner that there could be some liability there, which at this time we don't know if that's an actual factual thing that we're still looking into. So thank you.
All right. Next question is from Diane Messi. And it is asking, at what point did you meet with the SLV area fire departments telling them they would have no support available from CAL FIRE?
I'm not really sure of the question. When did we meet with the SLV departments and tell them we're not going to have any support from CAL FIRE? So, all the fire departments in the county knew that CAL FIRE was at its drawdown. If additional resources were needed, we were not able to provide them from CAL FIRE. And in fact, we were so far drawn down that we received notice from our region administration that handles the allocation of resources that we were to uncover every one of our fire stations, and which we did. So we had no more resources to commit to anything that would be new or any new needs until we got resources through the resource allocation process, which we explained that occurred earlier. We had, as we said, we had over 150 outstanding orders for fire engines, numerous orders for Cruz, aircraft, every piece of equipment that you could think of, we had on order trying to get it here to help us protect the communities and put this fire out.
All right, back to the raised hand feature, and we will go to Rebecca Hagan.
Hello. First of all, I want to say thank you to the sheriff. Before I answer my question, it was horrible to be displaced and evacuated, and to see on the news how many people were actually trying to go up there to loot. So I really appreciate your efforts in that. And then again to CAL FIRE. My question is, I'm off of Clear Creek Road, and my understanding is that the fire hydrant was shut off because the major pipe melted. And I wanted to know, it's not your area, but I figured you might have some feedback on what they were doing to correct that for the future.
Yeah, so I can try to answer a portion of that question. Is there was a major pipe that we had several pieces of infrastructure in the San Lorenzo Valley and other areas of the county that were affected by this due to the pipes melting, because they are plastic pipe, whether they are buried in the ground or if there was other reasons why that they were damaged. But I believe most of the water pipes have been replaced. There may be still a few that are outstanding that are due for repair, but I would have to defer you to the water districts specifically to get answers on the status of that repair. But we did have numerous lines that were damaged in the fire, including areas even out on the north coast in Davenport. The main feeder line from Santa Cruz to Davenport was burnt in the Mornella fire, which took months to get actually repaired. So I would have to defer you to the water district for that specific answer on the repair and what that looks like moving into the future. Thank you for the question.
All right, next question will be from D. Scruggs.
Yeah, hi, this is Dave. The question I had was about Code Red. I was actually in the office at Boulder Creek Fire during a lot of this. And we were getting people calling the office really early into the fire saying that they had Code Red alerts that they were getting that nobody else in their neighborhood was getting. And they were wondering why they were getting these alerts when the fire was still 10 to 14 miles away. And then there were, plus there were no notifications from Code Red or anybody like that about these evacuation notices to the local fire departments. And is that one of the issues that is, or are those one of the issues that are being dealt with the Code Red system?
Yeah, I think your name's Dave or Mr. Struggs. Yeah, I appreciate the question. And I'm not specifically sure when the alerts were coming in or what those actual alerts said. But as I said earlier, the Code Red system is an opt-in system. You actually have to register for it to get those alerts. So that may be the reason why some of the residents were getting the alerts and some of them were not getting the alerts. Specifically to the evacuations that occurred in the Boulder Creek area, Chief Bingham and I and the sheriff, we had that conversation about how the evacuations were going to be affected and when they were going to be affected in Boulder Creek. And those were initiated on that mutual conversation. So I don't know if the fire was 14 miles in advance, but those evacuations were made well in advance of that fire front. As you well aware, you probably live in the valley here. It's not easy to get in and out of the valley. So part of our methodology behind here was a systematic approach, starting from the very north of the district and of the county area bordering the district, was to move in a systematic approach from the north to the south, evacuating folks to get them out of the valley in the midst of the fire front potentially approaching, because we had gotten that word that that fire was moving towards the south. So that's part of how that approach was driven. Some of those Code Red, I'm not sure what those messages actually said, but to answer that portion of the question specifically is if you did not opt into that system, you would not be getting the alerts. Thank you for the question.
All right, we just have a few minutes left. We will go to Mark Lee.
Yes, hi. Thank you for presenting tonight. You guys deserve an applause for organizing defense for our community in San Lorenzo Valley. I have a question regarding the policy of CAL FIRE for what is it? Exit roads that are in areas that are particularly in the sand hills that are controlled by private property owners, and what kind of coordination you are working with them to keep those emergency exits open during the emergency period.
Yeah, Mark, thank you for that question. That is a common theme that we see across the county. And when we have residents that have allowed for access roads to be across their property, we try to work with them for the areas that we do know and have those identified to make sure that those roads are clear and that they're open and everybody can access them. There are some areas where property owners, a sale of a property and things like that occur where property owners no longer want to have that available to the residents. So really that's I have to defer back to our local fire protection districts to make sure that they're having that conversation to see what they can do to try to keep those areas open. A lot of these areas, we rely on the local fire agencies for that, helping us with that with the property owners, because they have that constant relationship with the community that can help facilitate that conversation. So I know in the midst of this fire, there were several areas where we had to go back in and open up old fire roads that had been basically abandoned. And that's one of the things in the 90s, we had significant cutbacks in our state budget where we lost actual resources, where we would actually go out and maintain these fire roads and the fire road gates and do that kind of work every year. But due to budget cuts, that work hasn't been done for many, many years. And that's something that is part of our planning processes that we really need to look back at to make sure that those access roads are available to the communities and work with those property owners. So we don't have a specific policy unless it was required for that development. And most of the time, unless it's in the strict SRA outside of a fire district, where it would be like in our county fire area, we would have direct control over those areas. But if it's within a fire protection district, that local fire district would be the one that would really have that history of how that road got established, whether it was required for the development, or if it was just a neighborly gesture that was done years and years ago. So,
all right. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Sorry if we didn't have time to get to your question. We will be attempting to answer each question that remains in the Q&A section of this Zoom call. We will also have questions that you can submit through the survey that you will getting emailed, and those questions that you email us directly. I just want to say thank you for your questions and for your courtesy and professionalism during this Q&A session. And I'll pass it back to Chief Larkin now for some closing comments.
Yeah, I'll make this really quick because we are out of time. I appreciate all of you spending the evening with us to allow us to provide you information and allow you to answer questions as well as us to try to provide those answers. As we are going to try to answer all the questions that did not get answered in the Q&A. I did provide you an email address as well as my office line that you can contact me directly if you have a specific item you would like to discuss with me. So thank you very much, and I hope you all have a great evening.